In this week's video, we do it live again. What up, Mini family? In the recent past, I've done videos in these styles where I have 3 cameras set up showing what I am doing to get a certain effect, and I skip nothing. You see literally everything it takes me to get from point A to point B. So you should be able to do this exactly with no problems, right? In this video, we tackle non-metallic metal. But before we jump into it, just to make sure my hair doesn't block this camera for all 50 minutes or however long it's going to take, we need a little bit of hair blockage in the form of, what's that? A black metal Miniac toque, as my Canadian brothers say. If you guys want to pick up a black metal Miniac logo beanie for yourselves, you need to become a Dark Wizard patron in between the dates of May 10th and May 25th. And then if you become one, you get one of these guys. And also just some clarity, if you already are one, you're getting one too. So no worries there. All right, enough shilling. Let's get to some NMM. All right, for today's live painting, we're gonna be doing an axe. And I wanna do an axe because I feel like it's more interesting than a sword. Because on a sword, all you have is this edge. But on an axe, you also have to deal with this flat of the weapon. And dealing with the flat part of the weapon is not the easiest when it comes to trying to paint reflective surfaces. I don't really know what to do with them, so I'm gonna show you how I deal with a flat surface like that. And we're gonna start out with some pretty neutral colors here. We're using scale 75 tones, flat black, white, and also graphite. We're just gonna put those on the palette. Now you could mix middle gray from just white and black, but sometimes it's just more convenient to have a little pile of it right there on your palette. Now the first base coat we're going to start out with on this axe is a pretty bright gray color, because probably the majority of the axe is going to be a pretty bright gray. We'll start there. I'm working with the size 0 Raphael 8404, which is my favorite brush, and you can find it linked in the description of this video, and that is an affiliate link. So if you purchase using that link, I'll earn a little bit of commission at no extra cost to you. Now also for this demonstration, we're not going to be painting the backside of the axe. That'll just be the exact same thing, considering that it's a mirror image. All right, let that dry and then we'll hit it again. An interesting feature of this guy comes from the Elthari Guardians box for Warhammer Underworlds, is that the axe edge itself isn't a flat grind, it's a hollow grind, which means that instead of just being a flat surface, it actually is rounded inwards. So you might have to kind of come up with a creative way to deal with that. All right, more base coats. We're just gonna skip this being fully base coated because this is boring. All right, 17 coats of paint later. It is good enough. It isn't perfect, but I'm impatient and I wanna get this ball rolling. We're running out of SD space. I'm gonna start to put in some darker shadows here, mixing some gray with the black. And, you know, truthfully, we're just gonna pick some random areas here along the edge of the blade to do some darker shadows. And we wanna vary the size of the shadow. We don't want it to all be the same size. And along the flat of the blade, why don't we toss one up here? And do a little recess shade right there. Okay, done. No, just kidding. All right, now I'm gonna start to map out some brighter highlights here. Actually, you know what? Let's call an audible here real quick. Let's make this a little bit smaller. We'll start to blend out some of these darker highlights with that same gray mid-tone that we used. Okay. I really don't like what I did on the flat of the X very much. So we'll paint over that and we'll start to do something like this. We'll make a generalization that the top of the X is darker and the bottom of the X is brighter. And then later in the process, we will break up those regions of highlights and shadows with some more randomness. Because essentially what a flat piece of metal is, especially silver metal, is it's a mirror. And so it's reflecting the environment around this guy, whatever that environment looks like. And you know, it's hard to kind of just imagine that. So we need to use some basic rules and also just kind of some creativity when coming up with stuff like that. Okay, we'll let that dry before we continue to mess with that. Come in with some pure white here, wipe it off on our palette or our napkin, and then feather it out. Okay. A lot of people were asking in my first video when I did a live painting demonstration, well, how do I blend without needing to eat my paint? And the answer is to use your wet paper towel to get rid of the excess paint on your brush. Ooh, get out of there, you little dot of water, you little skis bag. Wipe it off and then kind of feather it in where you want it to be. Okay, I can tell we have a little bit too much mid-tone gray and we're kind of getting a stony look rather than a silver look. So let's bring in some more of that brightness. Now another thing about non-metallic metal is that oftentimes it reflects colors in the environment around it. And there are a few ways to go about having your NMM have color in it. You could start with the color in your palette. I could, instead of using a white and a gray and a blue, or a black, I could use blue tones or green tones or purple tones. As long as the luminance values check out, then everything should work out. But what I like to do is maybe start with a grayscale color like we're doing here, and then introduce the colors. This kind of gives me a little bit more leverage in that I can choose where I want the fun colors to be. I'm not just stuck with them in the beginning. Now what I'm doing is I'm coming in with graphite that's been thinned down quite a bit. And I'm just kind of painting over the borders in between the dark color and the bright color just to kind of blur them out a little bit. Not being incredibly cautious at this point, because we're still in a pretty sloppy stage here. Honestly, this paintbrush is too small for this operation. Let's upgrade to a size 1 from Raphael. This is a little bit bigger. Got a little bit more meat. I don't know what color this is, but let's use it. A little bit of graphite, wipe it off. Blend it in. Let's grab some of that dark gray. Put it next to there. Wipe it off so it's not influencing the blend, and kind of just blend it in. Okay, now that I've demonstrated doing that enough times, can I go back to eating the paint? Thank you very much. All right. I'm not liking this large shadow right here. I think I might want to reduce that in darkness to maybe that color. I like the dark ones down here. I think those are okay. There's very little science to kind of doing something like this. Essentially, what we're doing is I have a long running edge right here, and where it's going to reflect light into the viewer depends entirely on where the viewer is and where the light source is. So I'm just gonna kind of play around with my colors here until I find something that I like. I think I wanna shift this highlight maybe down a little bit. Maybe more in this region, and then maybe put a little bit of darkness up there at the top. So let's try that. We'll get some of this gray. Start to introduce that. I'm kind of wrestling with paint here that's not fully drying. So I'm gonna head to the hair dryer and then come back to adjusting that highlight where I want it to be. Every once in a while I'll do a little edge highlight just to kind of see where I'm at. Because a lot of times the edge highlight can really tie together the look you're going for your non-metallic metal. And I'll hit it with a hair dryer again. You might wonder why I'm grabbing the certain colors that I'm grabbing on my palette to put on here. And honestly, there isn't a whole lot of logic to it. I'm kind of just doing it. You know, I know I want to highlight or I know I want a shadow, so I go and grab a shadow and then I put it down on the model. There isn't anything more to it than that. Okay, I think we've successfully moved the highlight down to the area that I want it to be. Now we're gonna start to have some fun with it. Toss on some graphite here to kind of work with that transition a little bit. Also, we can start to work with brush strokes like this on the edge, and what that can start to give us is a little bit of a kind of like a brushed metal look. If all the strokes are just being pulled down, it can kind of get a look like that. Some areas where the blend is rougher, like up here at the top, I want to smooth out the blend maybe before I start doing that. Alright, let's start to play with some black here. As I'm sure you all know, because you've watched at least one non-metallic metal guy before watching this video, an important thing to achieve good non-metallic metal is some solid contrast. I would debate that that's probably not the most important thing. It is an important thing, but it is not the most important thing. By the way, if you want all of my theory and all of my thoughts about non-metallic metal, I have a whole video about it, which will be linked in the top right-hand corner of the screen right now, which talks about kind of all of the physics behind why metal reacts the way it does to light, and so on and so forth. So, if you're in need of that, please watch that. This video is just about kind of just displaying the process and what it kind of looks like. Start to work with some white color, and I'm working with some pretty thin paint at this point. I'm in kind of more of a refinement step than I am like a slopping on paint step, so the more I start to refine, the thinner my paint gets. I don't like the size of this shadow down here, so I'm going to kind of increase it a little bit, or sorry, increase the highlight a little bit to reduce the size of the shadow. You want the contrast there, like you want to use dark tones and you want to use bright tones, but the way you distribute those tones is not equally. You don't have an equal amount of black and an equal amount of gray and an equal amount of white and bright tones. The distribution is not fair. It is biased toward brighter colors. When you're doing this kind of slashing technique, you want to make sure your paint is sufficiently moist, because otherwise you'll leave kind of dusty looking trails, and you don't want no dusty trails. I'm taking a look at this in the camera, and I think this highlight is just a little bit too, it's big, it's nice, it's bright right in the middle. We're getting a fun transition. I think it needs to be broken up with some different colors of highlights. I'm also not liking this bottom one right here, like, at all, so I'm gonna see if I can get rid of that. Let's mix some white and some gray. See if I can just get rid of this. I am not liking it, TBH. And maybe what we can do at some point to break up this bottom part is to bring this down to shadow. So the highlight will be maybe in the middle of the flat and then dark on both ends. It's kind of like I'm discovering what I want to do while I paint this. I'm letting the model kind of talk to me, and as artsy and fartsy as that sounds, that's kind of what I'm doing. It's like, okay, this looks like crap, let's change it. At some point, I will arrive at something that I like, and we'll kind of just keep smearing paint until we get there. All right, we'll take some of this dark color here and water it down quite a bit, and we'll use this to start kind of breaking up this white section, if that's gonna work at all. It doesn't seem like it's working very well. Let's get some thicker paint. Perhaps too dark. So we're starting to introduce some randomness now. We'll take some of our light gray. Let's get it a little bit more watered down here, and we'll start to mess with these little shadows we added. Maybe reducing the intensity of some of them, or kind of blending some of them out a little bit so they're a little bit less stark. At this point, they seem just a little bit too intense. So let's kind of pump up this white. Sometimes I'll just paint entirely over the shadow color just to reduce the entire thing in intensity. And with translucent paint, you kind of get just like a dulled down shadow. This bottom part of the axe is dry now, so I'll resume my work of trying to get rid of that shadow we added down there. I do like this one, so we'll keep this one. Now while that dries, we'll resume work on this upper half. I'm using a lot of the moisture in my sponge to kind of moisten some of my paints. All right, let's take a step back and take a look. All right, not terrible, not amazing though. These still just look like just lines, and I want it to be kind of more of a blended surface. Let's still work on the intensity of the white here. White is kind of a surprising color. You think you have maximum opacity, and oftentimes you just don't. And you need to keep going and keep applying more and more white. All right, take a step back, do a little edge highlight here, take a look at where we are. We're nowhere near done, but it's always good to kind of take a look. It's looking pretty shiny. It's looking okay, but I feel like these shadows that I added in, these secondary shadows to kind of break up that big one, still look a little bit random. I'm not sure if I liked this big one I added right there. Maybe we'll get rid of that. It can be a really hard thing to like put a lot of work into something and then kind of blow it away. Or worse yet, put a lot of work into a blend and then like add a shadow on top of it only to make a bad shadow. But it's okay. You can just paint over this stuff. You shouldn't get too attached to it. Okay, I think we're doing a good job of getting rid of that shadow we didn't want. All right, start to put back in some of that white we took away. Let that dry, leave that alone for a little bit. Come back to this. So in order to kind of expedite what I'm doing here, not having to keep going back to the hair dryer, I'm kind of just working on 2 different zones at once. Because you can only do so much like wet blending and feathering before you kind of just need to give up a little bit and let the paint dry so that you can adjust it and make it work. And then every once in a while you'll probably see me come in and paint in this dark color here just to kind of refine the edge of the blade here, just to kind of make sure where we're at. It helps visually to kind of understand what your blend looks like, so cleaning it up every now and then is a good idea. Because it's kind of hard to tell how everything's working out when it kind of looks like a mess around your blend. So kind of crisping it up helps you to get a better idea. Now, I'm actually having a little bit of trouble getting rid of that shadow we added in, but after a few base coats over it of a different tone, it's still there, and maybe now that it's less intense, it's kind of a good secondary shadow. Which is kind of funny. It's like, okay, I want to get rid of this, and I try to get rid of it, and then it's like, oh, actually, now that I've kind of base coated over it a few times with translucent color, it doesn't look so bad as what I thought it had looked like. So that's also a possibility that's happened to me before. I think we're creeping a little bit too much with this highlight color. And you know, same for the shadow. Sometimes it's nice to kind of come in and break up the shadow region with 1 or 2 highlights. Non-metallic metal is just so random that it's really hard to know exactly what's going on. Mix in some more black here. Get an even darker shadow. As I said, we want the contrast of the black, we just don't want it everywhere. NMM isn't as simple as just having white on this side and having black on that side and then doing a gradient in between the two. You have to kind of deal with, you know, the randomness of it. And I wish I could tell you a formula. Truth be told, it's a lot of just smearing paint, seeing what it looks like, and then moving on. At least from my perspective. And Lord knows I'm not the best non-metallic metal painter, so take what I say with a grain of salt. And another thing to kind of keep in mind is that eventually I want to come in with some colors. Because it says non-metallic metal silver, it does reflect the environment a lot, and that manifests itself in colors taking place in your metals. And so adding some tones and some colors can really help to sell the effect that it is a shiny thing. And so we'll make sure to do that at the end. But the reason why I'm bringing that up is because sometimes people really labor over their blends, and rightfully so. But that last stage where I, you know, add in color to the metals, that can also serve to help with some blending. So maybe we don't need to get like the perfect blends. Okay, now that tip is bright, let's paint the flat nice and dark here. While I'm grinding away on this non-metallic metal axe, I just want to shout out some patrons. In this video, we're shouting out Justin Soberg, Dylan Parson, Aaron Ramsey, Ian Millington Davies, Segarath the First Fool, Nick Joliffe, Francisco Vergara, Paul Sparhawk, Matthew King, Scott Corcoran, Daniel Whalen Jr., Craig Bryan, Eddie Burton, Storm Haunyal, wish my name was Storm, Kieran Lucky, Brady K, Ben McConnell, Jasmine Mangia, naked in my basement making pipe bombs. Okay. Jonathan Tackling, Kyle Kincaid, Alexander Ushka, Reflex Dog Training, and Falsifer. Hail and kill. Thank you to my new patrons and all my old patrons for the support that you guys give me on Patreon. I am getting dangerously close to being able to do this YouTube thing full time, which is absolutely insane. And it's largely due to the support that I get on Patreon. So thank you so much. Just endless thanks. I really can't say it enough. If you guys are curious about the rewards that I have going on Patreon, you can find it linked in the description below. And as I said in the beginning of the video, right now there's a special promotion running for the Black Metal logo Miniac beanie, and it ends tomorrow. So if you want to get on that hat, you got to get it today. All right, that's all for now. Now back to pulling my hair out, painting some NMM. Let's water down some of this dark gray here and see if we can kind of glaze it toward our area of shadow. And then feather out the area where we started. This is looking okay up here, but I'm not really liking what this looks like. I'm not entirely sure what about it I don't like. Maybe it's the size of the shadow, maybe it is something else. But we'll start with the size of the shadow. Maybe we'll just reduce it a little bit. And then we'll come back in and mess with some of the contrast. I don't have a whole lot of shadow in here as is, so reducing the overall shadow size is going to reduce the perceived contrast of what's going on here. And I just want to be mindful of that because we do want that contrast. So we'll have to see what happens when I make this a little bit smaller. All right, let's hit it with an edge highlight, see what's going on here. Okay, I'm liking that, not terrible. Let's just work towards smoothing this out, and then we can start to pump in some glazes. Actually, before doing that, we'll finish the flat of the blade, and then we'll start to work with some glazes. All right, let's take some more of this dark color. Let me get it pretty thin here. Smooth her out. Maybe while that thin color is still kind of wet, we'll come in with some graphite and see if we can kind of, I don't know, do stuff. Who knows what I'm doing, man? I don't even know what I'm doing. You're probably watching this like, what the fuck is this guy doing? And you know, I don't even know what I'm doing, okay? Leave me alone!
Okay, let's try to add in an edge highlight right here. This is something I'm definitely want to do. I just want to see if this is going to change my perception of what this looks like right now. So we'll clean this up. And then we'll paint a nice line here. Oops. Made that maybe a little bit too thick. I realize that I am obliterating the gray that I put down recently, but that's okay. Put very little work into that. That helps a little bit, but I still think it's probably too big. Okay. That's looking nice. Let's add in more of these kind of stripy goodness, just to kind of get like a fun brushed metal look, as the kids are saying these days. Okay, that's a nice result for the blade. I'm liking that. Let's work on the flat now. And just so this isn't so that there's like a secondary flat, and it's kind of distracting. And so we'll just paint it all dark gray and then only do one flat, because this is taking a little bit longer than I thought it would. Very carefully. So, to kind of glean some information before filming this video, I was checking out some people that I like who do NMM and who've done axes in the past. And one of my favorite is Michael Pisarski, or Michal Pisarski. I'm not actually sure how you pronounce it. And he's done axes a few times in the past. And I'll link his Instagram below so you can check him out, because he does some fantastic NMM work. And whenever he does an axe, he paints the flat just dark color. He doesn't even bother with it, which is kind of funny. I did take a class from him in the past about non-metallic metal, and he's like, "What is the most boring surface to paint?" And I said, well, he talked about dreadnoughts being boring to paint, and he said, "Does anyone know why?" And I said, "Because it's flat." And he was like, "Correct." And so I think he actively avoids painting flat surfaces. Maybe not. Okay, so now we got a flat surface and we gotta deal with it. So how do we deal with it? I think what we'll do is the old paint the area on the other part the opposite color. Wow, I explained that so poorly. Okay, there's a dark shadow up here, which we'll make darker later with some inks. Let's put the highlight right here. Put the shadow right here where the bright highlight is, and then kind of bring this down to a brighter highlight, which is opposite that. And that kind of like flip-flop can oftentimes make things look a little bit more reflective, you know, even if it's not entirely the most accurate thing. It doesn't necessarily need to be to sell the effect. So there's one, and maybe we'll do another one right here. What I'm doing right now is just kind of blocking in some shadows and some highlights. Oh, okay. That paint is still a little bit thick, so we will hair dry and then come back. Okay, just taking some of this dark color, trying to blend out that transition. Now, because I made the highlights larger on the blade, it's almost like the highlights on this are gonna be smaller if I'm trying to kind of match them up, like highlight to shadow, highlight to shadow. So because the highlight was so much bigger, it should have a bigger shadow on the flat of the blade. And that may end up kind of working out that way, we'll see. Actually, maybe, you know what? Maybe we should kind of creep this shadow over here so that the highlight is only on that little peak right there. We'll play around with that. All right, let's get some black paint here. Maybe water it down a little bit. Dab off the black, and we'll start to kind of just do some glazing here. Maybe just kind of smooth out that transition a little bit. Actually, maybe just so that this is totally not distracting at all, we'll just paint it pure black. Sometimes it can be, you know, difficult to understand and know what you're working with when you're distracted. You know, for the same reason, I'll do an edge highlight every now and then just to kind of see what I'm working with. Went a little gung-ho there. Okay, that's a little bit smoother now. Let's keep working down here with some brighter and brighter tones. Get a little edge highlight action going on right there. Okay, just like with the edge of the blade, what we need to be concerned with is randomness. So we can't just have this gradient from bright, dark to bright. Like, we need to kind of break it up a little bit with some different colors. Not colors so much, but just like different highlight areas. Start to pop in some brighter gray tones. All right, we'll do another pass here with thinned out black paint. Okay. Now sometimes what I've seen some people do is they'll make little kind of glowing highlights. So we have kind of a strong beam of color right there and also right there. So maybe what we can do is we can kind of carry it over a little bit right there to kind of create a little orb of light. And that can kind of give the impression of something glowing. So we'll consider that as a means to kind of like break up that large area of blackness. We don't want the whole thing to be black. Also, I want to make sure that I'm being a little bit more cleaner than I'm being right now, because I don't want to get much paint onto this edge here, because this edge is like the luminance values that are mapped out on this edge, like the brightness and darkness values, I don't want to adjust them a whole lot in terms of position. I want to make them more intense in certain areas, but where they are, I don't want to change a whole lot. So I need to kind of be a little bit more careful about where I'm getting paint, because it looks like I'm leaking a little bit here, and no one likes a leaker. And this is looking really dirty, as in bad, down here by the bottom. Okay. Let's start to bump up this little area up here we got going on. Okay. Starting to get a little bit stronger. Actually, you know what? Let's just smack down some bright white color and then kind of just deal with it. We'll take some white paint here that's watered down a lot and just kind of feather toward that little white nub that we put on the tip right there to ease the transition. And it kind of looks like I just obliterated that white nub. So maybe we'll kind of add it back in and hit it with a hairdryer to make sure it stays put. All right, that's where I want to end up, but I need to blend that. But before I blend that, that needs to be dry, so we'll dry it. All right, we're back. I'm gonna do some more of the black glazing here. All right. It's really important when you're transitioning in between colors when doing non-metallic metal, especially like when you just did black and you're gonna go into white, to actually rinse your brush out. I know for a lot of paintbrush slickers out there, myself especially included, I will oftentimes forget about my cup and just end up using my mouth to kind of clean my brush most of the time. And sometimes you gotta remember that your mouth ain't good enough for certain applications, and one of those applications is definitely transitioning between a dark color and a very bright color, like white and black. I'm struggling with this color transition down here toward the bottom. And usually my solution is to kind of just keep slamming it with paint until it looks good. So that's what we're gonna do. Let's get a sense for where we're at. And also I'm gonna put some more white paint on the palette here because it kind of just spread it out a lot. And I just want some fresh stuff. All right, let's see where we're at. Let's just do some edge highlighting here. Made that little corner there a little bit too bright. Alright, and not all edge highlights need to be pure white. So we'll just get some bright gray here and pop it in. Let's clean that up. And also I lost some dark gray. That's not looking too terrible. I think we need to still adjust this up here so it's nice and smooth. Okay, while that dries, maybe we can kind of consider adding in like a little dot of a highlight right there on the edge, kind of right next to where the bright highlight is on the other side. It's looking a little bit too intentional. Well, that's looking nice and sparkly. Oh, that was just just a wee bit too aggressive there with that color. I want to kind of do some more of these little dots. Just some tiny little shimmers. Now we can also kind of maybe consider adding in some other tiny little shimmers. Maybe we'll just put one in right here. Why? I don't know. Just to experiment and see what happens. We do need a nice sharp defining line because the lines I've been getting here are not as crispy as I want them to be. Oops, I didn't wait for that to sufficiently dry, so now I got a little circle. Let's see if I can kind of just wipe all the paint away. Just wipe it all away. Good job, Scott. Okay, let's try again here with that little dot. Maybe if we extend it onto the other side of the blade, it'll make more sense. Alright, looks okay. It's always amazing how bright you think your paint is, and then you put pure white on, and then it's just like, boom, hello. You have not achieved me yet. That's looking pretty good. I think we can start to add in some colors. We could probably labor over this for like a really long time, but you know, we're getting close to closing time here, folks. All right, I'm gonna add some teal to the palette. I'm gonna add some black ink and some purple ink. The teal is Caribbean blue from scale 75, and the black and purple ink are just the old Citadel ranges. People ask me a lot of times, well, I can't buy those anymore, what should I buy? And you can just buy Dollar and Rowney. That's a good company that sells inks. They're called FW, that's their series. All right, now first things first, I wanna do the black ink. And I think a pretty good question to ask is why are you using ink instead of acrylic paint? And the answer is because acrylic paint is, at least in this case, it's pretty matte, and I want a nice glossy shadow because I want a nice dark shadow, and a glossier dark is going to appear as darker than a matte dark. So we'll start to work in some of this ink into our shadows here, and it might give us a nice little satin sheen to our shadow, which is going to help even more with contrast. Alright, I think we could add a little bit more black ink just to kind of expedite this procedure. Just added some more black ink. We gotta make sure that we don't overextend the shadow down here. I don't want it to be too big, because last time I made it too big, we had problems. What happens when I use pure black ink here? What's gonna... Let us bring back some of that highlight toward the bottom here, because we kind of trampled it a little bit with our ink. And we'll kind of just work the graphite into that dark gray color using our striation pattern. And kind of work it back up to that bright gray color. And then some pure white. Now, if you don't want to labor over getting perfect blends a lot with your NMM, one good thing you can do to kind of just mask the blends is to add scratches and and like lots of battle damage to your weapons. That will kind of hide any big issues you have with your blends or small issues too. I want to kind of color the shadow a little bit with some purple. And we need to be very careful when adding tones, because this can really easily kind of take over what's going on here. Alright, let's grab some of this ink, dab it off, and start to have some fun here. We'll start small. And then slowly kind of work it in. It's doing its thing a little bit. We'll kind of work it into the mid-tone, but then stop there. Okay, we'll dry that off and we'll continue on. All right, we'll add a little bit of black into our purple here, just to kind of darken it down. We're working with too much purple on the brush right now. Okay, fun. Now we'll do a similar thing with the teal, except we'll focus more on the mid-tone and kind of like the highlight area. We don't want to obviously go all the way into the highlight because we want the highlight to stay pretty pure white. But sometimes what will happen during this stage, especially when I'm doing it, is we'll kind of trample over the highlights we have going on. So I need to come back in with pure white again and kind of just redo some edge highlights and kind of re-intensify the shadows. Now you may be curious about what other tones you could use, and you know, you can have a lot of fun with it because there are a lot of colors in the environment that could potentially be reflected with your NMM. So you know, kind of have fun with it. I'm not loving the teal a lot right now. Maybe when we start to add back in some brightness, that'll help a lot. Okay, I am liking where it's coming, or where it's at right now in terms of the coloration. So now I'm gonna start to add in some edge highlights and some final brightness. Oh no! Airbrush! So we'll take some white paint here and we'll kind of thin it up a little bit. Add back in some of that edge highlight. Looking good. Let's just pop it a little bit more right here. Very early in the video I discussed that we needed to deal with the fact that this is a kind of a hollow grind axe edge. And right now we're doing that by intensifying our highlights right at either edge of the hollow grind, but not right in the middle. And this will kind of give us the perception that this has a bend to it.
So an important step that I often take whenever I'm painting anything that takes a longer amount of time is that I take a picture of it at some point when I think it's done, and then I find all the things that I hate about it. So I took a picture of this, and now we're gonna take a look at some things that we can do to improve it after taking that picture. One thing I wasn't the biggest fan of was this area down here. I'm gonna start to angle in this highlight down here, because the way I have it is that it's kind of a hard stop. It's like it's perpendicular to the direction the blade is running, and I want it to be more following the flow of the blade. Yeah, that looks better. It looks better that the highlight kind of creeps further up the blade on this side of it than the other side. I also don't like how the highlight down here isn't as bright as it could be. So we're gonna try to bump this up a little bit with some pure white, and then we'll feather it out. And we may do that a few times. We may go back and forth between doing these two things. I'm using pretty thin paint to do this particular application because when it dries, it'll dry pretty translucent. And I'm just using a mixture of that bright gray, pure white, and the black, or the dark gray, to develop kind of a blend. Keep pumping this up. I want this to be mega bright. I also think I'd like this highlight up here to be a little bit brighter as well. Or maybe not brighter, but just larger. And the ink application to this top part of this blade increased the size of this this shadow probably more than I wanted it to be. Or made it larger than I wanted it to be, rather. So we will make this tiny again. Or not tiny, but sufficiently small. Maybe we'll come back with some purple to add some more purple. Went a little bit too far with that gray. Get some super watered white down to make those little glowing parts look a little bit bigger. I think it'd be nice because it seems like it transitions to a color here and then just there is no more transition. So it seems like it'd be nice if it actually went to pure black right at the top of that corner. So I'll put a little bit in and then feather it out. And then that's gonna dry a little bit less dark because right now it's wet and glossy, and it's a matte paint. One of the last things that you may want to do, and I did mention this in the past, was adding scratches to your piece. And we're gonna give that a go here. Now, I'm gonna mix up a slightly darker gray here
I'm not gonna use full black just yet, and I may never use full black. And you want to start with a color that's not insanely dark because you don't want this to kind of take over. And you're looking for really thin lines. Alright, I'm gonna do more, but I'm just gonna highlight this to see what it looks like. I'm gonna highlight the underside of it. And we need way more. I need some thick ass white paint to do this. And I don't want to use a ton. I don't want to do a lot of scratches because I feel like it just won't look that great. But maybe some in some of these areas that the blend is a little rough in will kind of give us just a little bit more texture. And I know for me personally, whenever I'm doing a scratch, there's like an inclination to like go all the way across the thing that I'm painting. So like all the way across the flat of the blade. But you know, in this case, to get some nice variety in the scratch, it's just okay to kind of just make a smaller one. Okay, let's do some more small ones here. We'll go a little bit darker now that we're adding a scratch to a shadowed area. And we'll go a little bit less severe with the highlight as well. So we're kind of just shifting it down. Got so much water on my paintbrush. And sometimes what you can do with the highlight color is you can kind of make the tone, you can thin down the black line a little bit by kind of cutting into it. See, I was a little bit concerned about the problem with doing things like this that occur kind of randomly is that you don't want to create a pattern. And I kind of am creating a pattern right now. The pattern is these cracks appear in pairs. So I'm gonna try to maybe avoid that. Also, I feel like this one down here especially is a little bit too stark. So we'll kind of make it a little bit smaller with some dark gray paint. And this one over here, the very first one we did, kind of want to bump that up a little bit. Okay, I think I want to add one more. This time I added 3. And scratches are kind of tough to do because it's really difficult to get the scratch to the right line width without it looking just totally unrealistic. You need a good sharp paintbrush, and you also need to kind of do what I said earlier where it's like you put the line down and then with the second color you come in and you reduce the overall width of the line. And that can kind of serve just to give our blade a little bit more texture, a little bit more life. NMM is all about kind of just, I want to say almost randomness. Just like
how can you make this thing seem reflective? Well, it's, you know, got to reflect a bunch of crazy stuff in the environment, and it's got to look used, and all of these things that you might not think about. I kind of just rambling at this point, but just want to make this highlight bigger. I just want to add a little bit more teal now. I feel like we kind of lost some of that. The problem with adding the teal is that it kind of darkens down the overall look, and I'm kind of fighting to keep this pretty bright looking. Add a little bit more acrylic paint. That was probably too much. I'm trying to not go into my maximum highlight zone to preserve that brightest white. Honestly, we could keep messing with this forever, but at some point, you gotta call it quits. And I think I'll call it quits after after I do just some final adjustments to this little black area right here. It's kind of like a competition piece, you know? It's like you could be done painting this whenever you want to be done painting it. You know what? I actually just don't like the full length cuts that we made here. I'll probably do less of those in the future on my future NMM endeavors. They just seem too forced. Just glazing in. Try to smooth that out a little bit. It's okay. Not everything needs to be perfectly smooth. Except for the stuff that I paint. Aha! Just kind of doing some dots here. Again, just kind of further making things look random. The edge highlight shouldn't be consistent. Nothing should be consistent. Also, this edge highlight up here is way too thick. See if we can kind of true it up a little bit with some dark gray. Paint. Alright, I'm gonna stop messing with it. That's gonna be it for now. Well, that's gonna do it for this one, guys. Let me know what you think of this fully unedited video style where I show you every single brush stroke that I'm taking to get an effect on something. Maybe I can change it up in a certain way. Maybe I can do other topics. Maybe you just don't want any more of them. Let me know. If you like the channel and you want to support it, there are many links in the description that enable you to do that, namely a Patreon campaign with a bunch of fun rewards, such as a Discord server where you and I can hang out any day of the week and chat about your personal painting projects. But also, there's an Amazon affiliate link that you can use while shopping on Amazon. Subscribe or die! And most importantly, don't forget to paint more Miniac!